Jonathan Turley with us now, George Washington University law professor, much more, Fox News contributor as well. Jonathan, good to see you. Well, what's the the odds here that this does go public?
I think the odds are against it being released. The courts often go with the Department of Justice when they make these types of claims. These claims are not anything new. I've been in cases where we have sought, even as a defense counsel, in a case that has resulted in indictment. We've seen the same exact claims made by the Justice Department. One of the things you have to knock down in these cases is to show the courts that these are often really sort of overextended claims. What concerns me about this response is that Merrick Garland is not really offering even modest steps to assure the American people that this was not politically motivated. You can redact an affidavit. You can recognize that this is a unique, historic moment. You can acknowledge that people have legitimate concerns given the history of the FBI and DOJ in Trump investigations. Garland has basically done none of that. He just basically says, we're not going to give you anything beyond the warrant and the itemized list. Well, he can do a lot more. For example, the Trump team, I thought, made a reasonable request that they should have used a special master to separate out privileged material that was gathered under this really broad warrant. Apparently, the Department of Justice told them no. Well, why? I mean, why wouldn't you want to do that to assure the American people that this wasn't just a pretext to get other types of evidence?
Would we get any idea that they got what they were looking for? Is that so much leaks in this case? I'm wondering if that leaks out.
Yeah, I mean, Neil, that's the curious thing when this judge has this hearing. He's going to look a bit foolish when he upholds this seal on the basis of a Department of Justice that's been leaking like a sieve. So apparently they're telling the New York Times and Washington Post all types of things about what's in this affidavit, but they won't tell the public. And this is also a unique case where the target of the raid is waiving objections. That's usually not the case because these affidavits are usually one-sided and very damning. Usually the target is not eager to have it be made public. Yeah. So the court's going to be in a rather awkward position.
To that point, Jonathan, the target rarely wants to see that released, but could it be a case of President Trump sort of calling their bluff?
Well, it is, and it worked. Because here he's saying is, don't hold it back for me. I think everyone should go ahead and see it. And there's a lot of problems with what we're seeing in this timeline. The Wall Street Journal's reporting that weeks went by before Attorney General Garland signed off on this application. Yet they're also saying they were worried about sensitive nuclear weapons information that could get into the hands of foreign adversaries. Well, which is it? I mean, was time of the essence, or was it not? You have this meeting in June, and the Trump team saying that they thought they were cooperating and had not been told that there was this major conflict that was building. That is true or not, but we would know from the affidavit. Now, keep in mind, Neil, the Attorney General could also just answer some of these questions, even if he doesn't release the affidavit. Much of that affidavit is already known to the Trump team. It deals with what their past discussions were. Why can't you at least release that in a redacted affidavit?
You know, there's so much to retrace here. Brett Baer joining us right now, a special report. Let's say Merrick Garland was going back and forth, weighing, pursuing this for weeks, we're told. I don't know what the latest account is, and never running this by the president. It just seems to stretch credulity here, but what are you hearing on that front?
No, I think Jonathan's right, and we've been talking about this, Neil, for a while, and that is that timeline is the biggest problem as far as the urgency of this moment. You know, if you're making the case in probable cause to this magistrate that you need to move quickly, it just doesn't fit with the negotiations that were going on in June with the Trump folks. And why does it take till August? And all that we're hearing from, again, single sources to leaks to the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, and the New York Times. I will say that what was interesting today in those leaks is that the New York Times is reporting that Pat Cipollone, the former White House counsel, has been interviewed in regards to this investigation. We knew he was interviewed by the January 6th committee, but in regards to this investigation. So what does that mean? Well, the White House counsel would have been in the circle of people who knew about declassification by the time you're leaving the White House and what you're taking, because the White House counsel is the person by which other agencies are alerted to that declassification. And if it is as sensitive as they're saying it is, as it's listed on that search warrant, then other agencies would have to know about that effort to declassify. So that is just an interesting bullet point, but I think the biggest disconnect is what Jonathan's talking about, and that is the timeline and why this happened the way it did.
So to that point, Jonathan, when former President Trump had said that he declassified the documents that were seized at Mar-a-Lago, A, can he do that? B, how does that change things?
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, the president has obviously the ultimate declassification authority. Presidents have suggested that they can instantly declassify material, and President Trump invoked that in the past in meetings with Israelis and others. I believe George Bush suggested he had that authority. It's never been tested. There are regulations, which, by the way, contain some exemptions for the president. So this is all unknown legal territory. Now, there is this question of a standing order. I and others have said, do they have any proof of that order? We haven't really seen that to see what it constitutes an order in their mind. But this is very precarious ground to build a criminal case on, because the president is viewed as having that authority. So when those boxes were put into those vans, he was still the president and had that. Now, keep in mind, these three provisions cited in the warrant do not necessarily require that the material be classified to be a violation. But it would make a case untenable if a court accepted that the president had declassified all of this material and was cooperating with the FBI in these negotiations.
Yeah, I'm no lawyer, Brett, but I think I qualify because I've watched a lot of legal shows.
Oh, I think so, Neil.
Absolutely. But I am wondering, though, Brett, I mean, by that definition, where the president can declassify documents, it would be open ground for any president to do the same and to just sort of see what flies.
Well, that's right. And I think Jonathan's right to say it hasn't been tested. I think what we did learn from the DOJ filing to keep this affidavit sealed is that there were witnesses involved, and they've got a grand jury process involved, and they don't want to risk those witnesses, what they told them, what exactly they're involved in as far as investigations, maybe just this investigation, but maybe other investigations. And they point out in that DOJ filing that it's a criminal investigation. So eventually, the DOJ is going to have to fish or cut bait here, and it is a matter of time. And the next step is this judge hearing, this magistrate hearing on Thursday.
All right, we'll watch closely. Brett, final word. Jonathan, thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brian Kilmeade. I want you to do me a favor. I want you to click to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page. This is the only way that I know for sure that you're not going to miss any great commentary, any great news bites, any great interviews coming your way on Fox. You can get it all here on YouTube. So subscribe right now.